Welcome, Jennifer. Thanks for meeting with me to chat about your progress as a composer and how you came to be a part of the Choral Composition Intensive. It's great to be chatting with you.
Thank you, Joseph. Excited to talk to you about it.
Fantastic. So tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you get into composing and lead us maybe up to where you were thinking about going to participate in the project?
Yeah, so actually, my first real experience as a composer was when I was in high school, and my high school choir director stopped me in the hall and said, "You will write a piece for the choir and you will conduct it." And then he walked away. And I was sort of dumbfounded by that whole exchange. But I ended up writing a piece for the choir. I was at an all-girls school, so it was an SSA piece. And it was a really wonderful experience that made me love writing music. And I didn't know that I loved writing music because I hadn't really done it. And that piece that I wrote then, I subsequently have rearranged multiple times, but it was the only piece I've ever written for a choir until this one. Writing for choir, I wouldn't say that it's my primary motivation as a composer, but as a musician, I've spent a lot of my performing and rehearsing time in choirs. I was in a great choir in high school for, I guess, 4 years, and then I was in the Stanford Chamber Chorale at Stanford University for 8 years as an undergrad and graduate student. So I love choir. It's maybe, one of my favorite things in the world. And I came across this poem, which we'll talk about, The Choir Invisible, a few years ago because I love George Eliot and I was, curious if she had any poems. And I thought, oh, this is a poem I'd want to set to music for a choir. And again, I'm not really on the lookout for poems to set to music for choir, but this one jumped out at me. Most of my interest as a composer is, I would say, for something in the musical theater, opera, sort of vocal space, but with a theatrical dramatic arc to it. That's most of what I do. But I was sort of between projects, and this was on my wish list of things to work on. And I was able to make it happen over the summer, and then I was able to record it with you. That's sort of the overview. I guess we'll get into details, but that's sort of the big picture of what happened.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. It's really cool to hear the overview. I didn't know some of those details. I mean, I would be stuck like a deer in the headlights if my teacher had said that to me as well about you're going to write a piece. Like, oh, okay, that's cool. So you mentioned that this piece, the Choir Invisible, this is the second choral piece you wrote. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
So what did you want to achieve as you were writing this piece? And maybe tell us a little bit more about the poem as part of that too.
Yeah. I will say I have written some choral moments before for musicals, but yeah, this is the second choral piece. So there were a few things going on. First of all, I love George Eliot as a writer, as sort of her story. Can I just talk about her a tiny bit? Okay, so for those who don't know, George Eliot lived from 1819 to 1880. She was sort of the generation after Jane Austen, and her real name, I think, was Marianne Evans. And she was a really interesting, very successful woman as a writer. And whereas, not that there's any utility in necessarily comparing them, but a lot of people know Jane Austen as someone who wrote about romances and sort of these, private, like the inner workings of relationships and things like that. And George Eliot was interested in sort of bigger themes of how does someone's, the intimacy of one's life, how is that offset against the movements of history and these bigger philosophical ideas. And she was someone who really grappled with that kind of big stuff. She's most known for her novel Middlemarch. Some people think it's the greatest novel in the English language. I think it's a great novel, but I personally have a strong attachment to her final novel, Daniel Deronda. I've read it several times. It's had a big impact on me, and it's kind of a strange novel, but it has a bunch of unique features. Some people think that the heroine of that novel, Gwendolyn Harleth, is like one of the best characters ever written in the Victorian period. It's also a novel that deals with what it means to be an artist and a musician and the stakes of that. And another really unique feature is that it deals with Jewish characters in a non-stereotypical way, and was probably the first novel to do that, written by someone who's, not Jewish. And so yeah, she's someone who grappled with ideas in a way that I found really interesting. And so I was just curious to check out her poetry. And in reading this choir, I mean, just the name of it, I was like, I wonder if that has choral potential in it. And I know I'm not the only person to set it to music. But in reading the poem, it was just another reminder of the kinds of issues she was living with in her mind. And maybe I could just read a tiny bit of the poem.
Yeah, please.
The first stanza, she says, "Oh, may I join the choir invisible of those immortal dead who live again in minds made better by their presence, live in pulses stirred to generosity, in deeds of daring rectitude, in scorn for miserable aims that end with self, in thoughts sublime that pierce the night like stars, and with their mild persistence urge man's search to vaster issues." So, part of why this resonated for me was I've spent several years working on a musical called The White Rose, which is about these students who led a resistance effort against, Nazi Germany, and who died in that effort. And a big part of the questioning of learning about that and sitting with it and writing about it is, what was their impact? And how do people who've done things live on? And what does that do for us? And here she is, George Eliot, saying, I want to be one of those people.
Mm-hmm.
And I just find that so moving, that that's her aspiration. I certainly feel that in her work, and I feel that resonance in, the people that I want to write about, that I want to learn more about. So I think there's something about her that's just very, very earnest and genuine in that aspiration. So that's sort of what made me really curious to use this poem. And other aspects, I mentioned that I've had a lot of experience singing in choir, and specifically my choir at Stanford, due to the background of my choral director, so much of the singing we did was in the Anglican choral tradition. So this beautiful music I'd never been exposed to, that was written for these tall British cathedrals and has that sort of cathedral sound. And I loved singing that music. I think a lot about my favorite piece, Bring Us, O Lord, by William Henry Harris.
Mm-hmm.
Just like, yeah, it's just so spacious. And the way it feels as a singer when you do that, and singing like the Howells Requiem or Walton or Charles Villiers Stanford or Vaughan Williams, like all of that stuff, it just felt so good, and it had this particular sound and particular feeling and felt so good in the voice, and oftentimes was exploring these different, modal writing, which I really enjoy. So yeah, I wanted to live in that kind of sound world with this piece. So that's kind of what was coming together. And finally, I'll just say one of the really unexpected parts of working on it is this is a 4-stanza poem. And to be honest, in reading it many times, for the second and third stanza, I kept being like, what is she even talking about? I don't understand what these words mean. It's just kind of complex. But what was really cool was setting that to music and trying to make it intelligible to myself. I felt like I understood it more, and I felt the writing of the music helped me make sense of it more. And I really appreciated that part of this process.
That's really cool. I mean, this isn't something that I imagine that most English majors and students of literature don't have access to, but it's almost like, composition as literary criticism.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah. Oh, yeah, totally. Yeah.
that's super cool. So you're writing this piece, you're, really getting into this poem by George Eliot. And this is, a second choral piece for you. What did it mean to you to, compose this piece and to really be able to dig into the text like that?
Yeah, well, so another big thing that was going on for me when I wrote it last summer, so that was summer of 2024, is that I was pregnant at the time, and I would say the previous at least 2 years, but several years have been big writing years for me. I had been working on this musical for a long time. I released an album of that in 2022. In 2023, I did a production, and I also wrote and recorded another album in 2023. So I guess on my wish list is, I want to be writing something every year, but last year was not a big writing year for me. It was big in other ways. But I don't know, I just felt like it would be nice to have written something, and this feels like a relatively, by contrast, short project that I could maybe get done in a few months. And I think I got it done in maybe 2 to 3 months. And that was that. I had sort of contemplated, how is this, I would love to hear this sung by real people and not by MIDI on Sibelius. Not sure how that's going to happen. I knew that you were doing this choral intensive, and I'd worked with you in the past and gained a lot from our work together. But, because of my pregnancy, I didn't really feel like committing to anything at the moment. And then I can't really remember what happened. I think after my babies were born, I had twins. I don't know if you sent an email or something.
Yeah, I don't remember either.
Something, I mean, I think not, because when I emailed you, you didn't have any spots left. So, so I think it was maybe in December or something that I reached out and asked, do you still have any spaces left in this choral recording opportunity? And you said no. And I was like, okay, I mean, fair enough. And then you reached back out because I guess someone had dropped out and you did have a spot. So I said, great, I'll take it. And then the recording was supposed to happen like right when the fires broke out in LA, and you came to town and left right away, and I was in LA, and I was so excited to go to the recording session, which was the day after my birthday, and it was like, oh, it's gonna be my first day away from the babies. I was actually really, really looking forward to it. But then, we were in this like apocalypse of fire, and I left town like right around then. So it was very dramatic, but then the recording happened. And yeah, so it's amazing to be able to be here. I don't think when I was writing the piece, I thought that a few months later I'd have this beautiful recording that brings it to life for me. And that's so amazing that you were able to make that happen.
Yeah, I think it's cool hearing the story from your end. So from my end, what happened is, I'm there shepherding my students through this whole process, and then one of them, lets me know that he isn't able to participate anymore. But I was at a conference. I was at the Midwest Clinic, and I get this email from you, and I was just like, oh, okay, well, this changes things. It's kind of fun, just
Mm,
completely out of the blue, but the timing was just very serendipitous.
it's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. So you wrote the piece, you weren't sure if it was going to get performed or recorded, and we talked a little bit about the story about how that recording happened. I'm curious between so we had a lesson where we went over the piece. I think you tweaked a few things, and we did the recording. What did you learn as a result of, meeting with me about the piece, getting the piece recorded? What's different now that you've heard this recorded?
Yeah. Well, there are some practical things. I don't know if it sounds sort of like menial, but for me, it makes a big difference because there are certain things, for instance, about score preparation where I don't have the knowledge or experience to know that it should be a certain way. So I remember one of the things that you taught me how to do that is a basic for choral composers, but was really, really, really helpful for me was making a piano reduction. And, wasn't actually that hard to do, but it had been on my mind as like, oh man, it's going to be a lot of work to do that. But it wasn't because I guess one day I should actually learn how to use Sibelius completely, but that's another topic. But yeah, I felt a lot better knowing that you had helped me prepare to make the score as prepared as possible for the recording session, which is so essential for it to be productive and a good use of time for everyone there. And that was a big concern that I had because I didn't want anything about how it was written to hold up the process. So that was really critical. And there were, a few compositional things that I was just a little unsure of regarding, how to notate things and my, like weird key changes and other questions, and just getting to go over that with you as not just a composition teacher who's helping me in the abstract, but as someone who's helping me prepare for this recording session with, a professional choir where time is of the essence. So I felt like your insight really helped make sure the preparation was on point. And then working, the recording session itself, I got to observe. I didn't really participate in it. But it was just so cool to see the professionalism of Matt, the conductor, and just, the way it was carried out. And the final product of it gives me what I was hoping for in terms of breathing life into this music and helping me hear what it sounds like when the text and the music come together, and the phrasing and the chords, and yeah, seeing how that all lines up. And it was interesting too in the rehearsal process, seeing the spots that I'd written where, it was not easy immediately for them to get it. And that's important for me to know about too. The spots where it's not intuitive. I remember I had this one bass line where I was like, can't believe I wrote that. Sorry, basses. I went through it to the piano and sung it. I was like, oh, that's kind of mean that I would do that to these poor singers. But yeah, it's helpful to find those things, but all in all, I thought they did a beautiful job.
Yeah, no, I feel like stuff like that happens to the best of us, where like we realize sometimes after the fact, oh, maybe I shouldn't have written it that way.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they did a great job. Like, it was not certainly within their grasp, but I could have saved a little time, I think.
for sure.
So,
I think for me, the other thing that I really loved about your piece was just how it breathed. There was just a lot of breathing, of giving the text kind of like the space to expand and fill the space, but just also a lot of breathing in terms of you weren't just having four parts going the entire time. There were these really lovely texture shifts where it's like, well, now the women are doing a thing and now the men are doing a thing. You kind of go back and forth and weave it all together. And it's just very gentle and almost kind of stately in how it was presenting through the text.
thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. On that note, I'm curious, like, so, you're listening to it in the MIDI. What surprised you or delighted you about hearing it in real life?
Well, one of the things that made me nervous about setting this poem is that it's so heavy in ideas, and there's a lot of big words that are not particularly musical. And that was one of my challenges in setting it. And that was one of the reasons why I did, more than I have with other pieces, have like a solo line, or, just trying to manage these words that don't, I feel, lend themselves to being sung and understood really intuitively. And hearing singers and the choir sort of adapt to that and kind of move through those moments and then sink into the moments that I did feel like lend themselves well to a big choral moment, I felt like they really achieved that. And, in MIDI, everything's kind of the same. So that's what I was hoping to hear, and I felt like they really delivered on that, and that was very satisfying for me.
That's very cool. Well, congrats again on writing a fantastic piece. I'm curious, what are you working on next?
What am I working on next? Well, I'm continuing to rewrite my musical, The White Rose. I have another musical project in the works that I'm very, very at the beginning of. I have an idea for a song cycle that might be a more manageable project that I try to work on this year. And then I'm spending a lot of time playing the piano and just really developing that more and allowing that to be a source of inspiration as a composer. And yeah, so I hope to be making another recording of something next year. And I hope to have written something, whether it's one piece or a few pieces by the end of this year, and, one of those projects. So we'll see how it ends up working out.
Fantastic. That's very cool. Now, if there were other composers in your situation who are interested in writing choral pieces, or really just, other composers in general, so you've now been through this whole choral composition intensive, who would you recommend it to?
Well, I mean, I think there's so much value in finishing your work. So if you haven't experienced that, this is the perfect way to do it. To go the full cycle of, and I think of finishing my work as having heard it sung or performed or ideally recorded at a level that's high enough to hear what you did, so that, because it could be at a level where you're sort of obsessed with like the performance itself or the quality that you can't actually hear your work. But to me, that's a crucial part of this process. So yeah, I would encourage any composer who doesn't feel similarly to try that out, to see how can I shorten the cycles to completion. And doing a choral work, I mean, I've never written a symphonic piece, so I mean, I don't know if I ever will. We'll see. But to me, a choral work feels manageable. I was able to write it in a few months, whereas, typically I'm working on projects that take years. So being able to cycle through things quickly and go from an idea to it's written to it's recorded in a beautiful way in a matter of months, to me felt like a really satisfying way to go full circle. And I just, like, that's a standard I hold myself to as someone who is looking to build up a body of work and to continue iterating and getting better. So I think whoever shares those values, I think this would totally be for you.
Fantastic. Well, thanks again for taking some time to meet with us and tell us about your story. If people want to find out more about you and your music, what's the best way to do that?
I have a website, jenniferrosenfeld.com, and you can find my music on Spotify.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for again sharing your time with us and sharing your music with us, Jennifer. We'll see you later.
Thanks, Joseph.